My name is Zach Evans. I am a VA disability benefits attorney here at Woods & Woods in Evansville, Indiana. And I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about marginal employment and protected and sheltered work environments. Now, as we've discussed previously, TDIU, IU, unemployability findings, however you want to characterize it, requires that a veteran is unable to secure or follow a substantially gainful occupation as a result of their service-connected disabilities. Now, substantially gainful employment is defined as SGA, substantial gainful activity, an amount of earnings that is at or above the federal poverty threshold for one person. Anything less is known as marginal employment. A good example of this is part-time work. If a veteran is working part-time and is pursuing a TDIU or IU determination, the VA will often use this to frame a veteran's work situation as a choice rather than a circumstance that flows from their service-connected disabilities. Many veterans simply cannot afford to go without an income while waiting for the VA to do the right thing. This is where your attorney comes in. Now, odd jobs are often completed by veterans or pursued by veterans on an on and off basis because employment cannot be sustained. The stressful, demanding nature of full-time employment is precisely why, both physically and psychologically, veterans are unable to obtain SGA or substantially gainful employment. Now that we've talked a little bit about what marginal employment is in terms of what your income level is, now let's talk about what happens when you may be earning SGA, but you're in a protected or a sheltered environment. So we're looking primarily at accommodations here. We've got a few examples. So one of them is when an employer will tolerate less reliability from an employee. If a veteran employee is able to leave early or take unscheduled breaks due to chronic headaches or panic attacks that flow from their service-connected post-traumatic stress disorder, that's considered an accommodation that could allow us to characterize the employment as protected or sheltered. Another good example would be if an employer tolerates lower productivity. So if you're supposed to put out 50 items in a given hour, and most of the rest of the workforce puts out about 50 items in production in that hour, and there are some days when you attend work and you've decompensated a little bit. Maybe you were up late due to your service-connected sleep apnea. You didn't get very good sleep. You're only putting out about 30, 35, whatever it is, and your employer doesn't hold that against you. That's another good example of a protected or a sheltered work environment. Another good example would be altered work requirements. So if your job description involves maybe a fair amount of manual labor, let's say carrying heavy items from point A to point B. Let's say Bob has to carry these items from A to B, but veteran employee Dan is not required to because of his service-connected degenerative disc disease in his lower back. That would be considered an accommodation based on his veteran status. Another example is leniency for conduct. We see this sometimes whenever we have veterans with service-connected mental health disorders, and they have difficulty coping with the stresses of the workplace. Sometimes veterans can decompensate in the workplace and lash out either unknowingly or unwittingly, or it's just a momentary lapse of reason or judgment. If an employer will look past some of these transgressions because they understand what the veteran has experienced, maybe in combat or in a particular situation that happened to them while they were in the military, if they are aware of these limitations and will tolerate those in a workplace and allow the veteran to return the next day, take the rest of the afternoon off and come back, we'll see you tomorrow, that's another great example of a protected or a sheltered work environment. A key to developing these types of cases or to developing this type of evidence to help win IU in the face of protected work environments is that you really need statements from people that you work with. So you want to sit down and try to think of coworkers, supervisors, or close workplace friendships. You want people that really know your situation, that know you're a veteran. Maybe they don't have a complete understanding of your full backstory as a veteran, but they know loosely what you're dealing with, and they can provide some insight to your attorney and to the VA as to why in a competitive, completely comparative workplace where you're not sheltered, you would not be able to sustain that employment. Another good example of a protected, sheltered work environment would be self-employment. So we see a lot of veterans who have spent maybe 30 or 35 years in an industry, maybe working in a trade whenever they got back from the Vietnam War. And then suddenly they were forced into an early retirement, couldn't do the job anymore, but they still like to do something to keep their mind busy. There's a hobby that interests them. Gunsmithing is a good example. You know, if John brings over his shotgun because he needs some work done on the firing pin, and you decide to provide that service for him, does that mean that you're able to go out in a competitive work environment and earn at substantially gainful level? Probably not. And here's why. Is because even if you charge for the work, you're making your own schedule. You can scale down the operations. You can take less work orders. You can say, this has been too tough of a week for me. I'm not in a good place today. And at the end of the day, you're not going to fire yourself if you work for yourself. Another related area of protected or sheltered employment is family employment. Statements here are very important. Especially if comparisons can be made with non-family employees. Family members who employ you are uniquely positioned to understand what you as a veteran are going through. If you have confided in people when you returned from your time in service about things that have affected you, about your declining health, it's likely to be family members. And so it's a very unique protected situation. You want to make sure that you can obtain some sort of a statement from the uncle that you work for or the brother-in-law that employs you in the shop a couple of days a week. It's really important here, the overarching question that you want to be able to answer when it comes to marginal or protected sheltered work environments is why these service-connected conditions prevent you from substantial gainful employment in a competitive environment, because that will answer one of the questions that the VA is going to ask whenever they're determining your IU status. And that is your unemployability at SGA level due to your service-connected disabilities? If you have any questions about marginal employment, protected work environments, sheltered work atmospheres, please give us a call at Woods & Woods in Evansville, Indiana.